The first laugh hit harder than any insult ever could. It echoed across crystal glasses and silver plates, sharp, cruel, and deliberate. I remember the sound because it didn't come from strangers. It came from the man I once called my husband. The dinner was supposed to be his celebration, a luxury party in the city's most expensive restaurant. Marble floors, chandeliers that sparkled like frozen rain, and a table so long it looked like a boardroom of kings. I wore a black dress I'd saved for years, simple but elegant. I thought he'd be proud of me. Instead, he looked through me. He introduced me to his colleagues like a side note. "Gentlemen, my wife, she used to paint before she discovered Netflix." The table erupted in laughter. Smiled too. Not because it was funny but because it was safer. Because I could feel trapped behind the wall of my pride. So I said nothing. The waiter poured more wine. The lights gleamed brighter. The music felt louder, crueler. My husband leaned back, draped his arm around my chair, pretending affection. "You know what makes her special," he said, voice slick with arrogance. "She never complains. No matter how small her world is." That line drew the loudest laugh of the night. And in that moment something inside me cracked. He wasn't celebrating success. He was performing dominance. I was his prop. His soft-spoken proof of power. I excused myself and walked to the restroom. My heels clicked against the marble floor, echoing like a metronome counting down to my breaking point. Inside the mirror, I saw a woman I barely recognized. Polite smile painted over humiliation, eyes glassy but defiant. I took a deep breath, gripping the counter until my knuckles whitened. "Don't cry," I whispered to my reflection. "Not here. Not for him." When I returned, he was too busy laughing at another joke, something about wives and shopping habits. I sat quietly, finishing my untouched wine. The liquid burned my throat, but it numbed the ache in my chest. The rest of the evening blurred into flashes. Clinking glasses, fake congratulations, the smell of expensive perfume, and his smug grin across the table. I didn't hear half of what was said. I was somewhere else, in the silence of my thoughts, drawing lines between who I was and who I'd become. When the night finally ended, we walked to the car. He stumbled slightly, drunk on his own ego. "You were too quiet tonight," he said, unlocking the door. "Try not to make people uncomfortable next time." I stared at him. For the first time I didn't see my husband. I saw a stranger wearing his face. "Good night," I said flatly, stepping into the car. He laughed again, thinking I was being dramatic. He didn't know he was already talking to a ghost. The drive home was silent. City lights streaked across the windows like tears I refused to shed. I watched them blur and vanish, the same way my love for him did, quietly without ceremony. In bed that night, he fell asleep immediately, snoring softly beside me. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the rhythm of betrayal in the dark. Every cruel laugh replayed in my head. Every word twisted itself into a promise I made to myself. Never again. I realized something powerful in that silence. Humiliation doesn't end you. It reveals you. And that night, beneath the weight of his arrogance, I found my strength again. I turned to look at him one last time, lying peacefully beside me. His face still smug even in sleep. I felt nothing. Not anger, not love, just the calm certainty of someone who's already gone. That night I stopped being his wife, even if he didn't know it yet. The sound wouldn't leave me. That laugh, sharp, hollow, cruel, kept echoing inside my skull long after the dinner was over. I lay beside him in our king-sized bed, wrapped in silence that felt colder than the sheets themselves. His steady breathing filled the room, arrogant even in sleep. The scent of his cologne, the one he wore to impress others, clung to the air like an insult. I turned on my side, staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying every moment from that night. The flash of champagne glasses. The glint of diamonds on his colleagues' wives. The look of pity one woman gave me after his joke about my failed little business. I could still hear their laughter, crisp and polite but drenched in cruelty. He had humiliated me not out of drunkenness or carelessness. He had done it to perform, to prove he was better, smarter, richer, stronger. And I had sat there, silent, smiling like a trained mannequin. "Why didn't you speak up?" I whispered to myself. But I knew the answer. Because I'd spent years swallowing my voice to keep the peace. Because I had mistaken obedience for love. I rolled over and looked at him. The moonlight carved sharp edges across his face. He looked peaceful, almost innocent. A stranger who had used my loyalty as a stage prop. I wanted to shake him awake. Tell him how small he made me feel. But what would be the point? He'd only twist my words into another joke. "Come on, darling, don't be so sensitive," he'd say. It was just a bit of fun. Fun. That's what he called it. Public humiliation dressed up as humor. My fingers tightened around the blanket. I could feel my pulse racing, the kind of anger that isn't loud but lethal. The kind that grows quietly, feeding on silence. The city outside glowed through the curtains. Tall buildings, faraway traffic, people chasing dreams while I was trapped inside a golden cage. I used to believe this house, this bed, these walls were proof of success. But now, every polished surface just reflected my mistakes back at me. I got up slowly and walked to the balcony. The night breeze brushed my face, soft but heavy with thought. From up here, the city lights looked like tiny fires, each one belonging to someone living their truth. And mine. Mine had gone out long ago. I thought about the girl I used to be. Ambitious, curious, full of ideas. The one who once believed she could build something meaningful. I had traded her for comfort. For him. And now he had the audacity to laugh at the ashes of the woman I once was. "Never again," I murmured under my breath. The air felt different when I said it, as if the night itself heard me make a promise. I didn't know what I was going to do yet, but I knew I couldn't keep living like this. When I went back to bed, he stirred slightly, mumbling in his sleep. "Smile, sweetheart," he slurred faintly. "Don't ruin the night." My chest tightened. I looked at him, the man who believed he owned my silence. I thought about all the times I had defended him to friends, all the times I'd said, "He's just tired, he doesn't mean it." But tonight I knew better. He meant every word, every laugh, every cruel little smirk. I lay down again, but I didn't close my eyes. I didn't want sleep. I wanted clarity. And in that long, empty hour between midnight and dawn, it came to me, the realization that changed everything. He thought my silence was weakness. He mistook my calm for surrender. But silence can be sharper than words. It can slice deeper than a scream. Because silence listens. Silence learns. Silence plans. And as I lay there, unmoving beside the man who mocked me, I made my first silent vow. He laughed at my silence. He never realized silence was where I planned my revenge. The morning felt too calm for what I was about to do. The sun rose gently through the curtains, lighting his side of the bed. Empty now because he had already left for his early jog. He liked starting his day like a winner. I smiled bitterly at the thought. I moved slowly, deliberately, like someone who'd rehearsed this moment 1,000 times. Maybe I had. The air smelled of his cologne and stale pride. The faint trace of last night's silence still hung between the walls, thick, suffocating, unforgettable. I stood in the middle of the bedroom, my hands trembling only once before I forced them to steady. 4 years I had arranged his clothes, pressed his suits, made sure his life fit perfectly in the frame he'd built. Now it was time to make space for mine. The wardrobe doors creaked open. My reflection stared back from the mirror, the woman who had smiled through mockery, through dinners that felt like stages, through love that demanded invisibility. I started packing. Not much, just the essentials. A few clothes, my laptop, the photo of my mother that always made me feel braver. No jewelry, no gifts, no reminders. Those weren't mine anymore. I folded everything carefully, not because I was sentimental, but because I wanted control, the kind he'd always claimed. Every item I placed in the bag felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. The housekeeper, Maria, appeared in the doorway, eyes wide. "Ma'am, are you traveling?" she asked softly. Paused, then smiled faintly. "Yes," I said. "But not the way you think." Her lips parted, but she didn't ask more. She knew better than to question a woman with that kind of look in her eyes. I pressed a small envelope into her hand. "Don't give this to him until after I've gone," I whispered. She nodded, clutching it like it was something fragile. As I walked through the house, everything felt louder. The ticking clock, the hum of the refrigerator, the echo of my footsteps. It wasn't a home anymore. It was a museum of someone else's victories. I paused at the dining table, the same one where he'd once teased me about never finishing anything I start. He was wrong. I was finishing this. In the living room, sunlight hit the wedding portrait hanging above the fireplace. We looked perfect there. His hand on my waist, my smile flawless and empty. For a moment, I almost pitied the woman in that picture. She looked so proud to belong to him. "I'm sorry," I murmured to her. "But we're done pretending." Then I turned the frame face down. Before leaving, I slipped off my wedding ring and placed it on the marble counter beside his favorite watch, the one engraved with, "To the man who never stops winning." He'd never realize how much he'd lost until that ring stared back at him. The city outside was quiet as I stepped into the morning light. The air was cold, clean, honest, a contrast to the heaviness inside me. I hailed a taxi, clutching my small bag. It wasn't much, but it held everything I needed to start breathing again. "Where to?" the driver asked. I hesitated, realizing I didn't have a destination yet. Only direction. "Anywhere but here," I said softly. As we drove away, I watched the mansion shrink in the rearview mirror. The place that once made me feel safe now looked like a cage gilded with gold. I didn't cry. Not once. I thought I would, but there was no grief left. Only clarity. By the time we reached the edge of the city, I pulled out my phone and turned it off. No more messages. No more calls. No more him. He would wake up soon. Find my side of the bed cold, the ring gone, the note waiting. Just one sentence. No apology. No explanation. Only truth. "You'll see me again, but not as your wife." For the first time in years I felt light. Weightless. Alive. I didn't know where I was heading or what would come next. But the uncertainty didn't scare me. It thrilled me. Because freedom, I realized, didn't feel like running away. Felt like walking toward something bigger. The first night alone I couldn't sleep. Not because I missed him, but because the silence finally belonged to me. The walls of my new apartment were thin enough to hear the neighbor's TV through them. The fan clicked every few seconds, and the window rattled when the wind pushed too hard. But it was mine. The place smelled like dust and old memories, the kind that didn't belong to me yet. Cracked tiles, peeling paint, a flickering bulb. All of it somehow felt like freedom disguised as imperfection. When I'd found the listing, the landlord warned me it wasn't much. He was right. It wasn't. The bathroom was barely big enough to turn around in. The kitchen counter was uneven, and the window faced a noisy street filled with street vendors shouting over each other. And yet, when I signed that lease, my hands trembled with something that felt like victory. I spent that first morning sitting cross-legged on the floor with instant coffee and no furniture, watching sunlight creep across the walls. It didn't matter that the cup was chipped or that the coffee tasted bitter. It was mine. Every inch of this broken space was mine. I opened my laptop, the same one I used to help his projects, and created a new folder. "New life," I typed. Inside it, I started building a portfolio from scratch. No husband's name, no shared credit, no pretending. Just me, my designs, and the quiet determination pulsing in my chest. By noon, I signed up for freelance platforms. I hadn't done real client work in years. He always said my little hobby was cute but not serious enough to matter. So now I would make it matter. The first few days were a blur of rejections. No one wanted to hire someone with no reviews. My inbox filled with polite declines and one-word responses. But I kept at it. I refused to give up before I began. Finally, a message appeared. Need a logo. Budget, $25. Can you deliver in 24 hours? $25. It was insulting, really. But I smiled anyway. Yes, I typed. I can. I worked through the night, my back aching, my fingers stiff, my stomach empty. I poured every ounce of focus into that small project. Colors, curves, fonts, until it felt alive. When I sent it off the next morning, I expected nothing. But the client replied within an hour. Good work. Sending payment now. The notification pinged, and for a moment I just stared at it. $25. It wasn't about the money. It was about proof that I could create, contribute, stand on my own. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for someone else to validate my worth. I closed my laptop and leaned back against the cold wall, smiling through tired eyes. Outside, a street vendor shouted, "Fresh bread! 2 for 1. And the sound made me laugh. The city felt alive, chaotic, honest, like it didn't care who I'd been before. Every morning after that, I built a routine. Wake up early, brew cheap coffee, design until my eyes burned. At night, I'd walk through the neighborhood, past flickering neon signs, old couples arguing on balconies, and children chasing stray cats. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real. Some nights, I'd lie awake listening to the rain tapping the metal roof. I'd think about the mansion, the silence, the marble floors, the cold perfection of it all. And then I'd glance around my tiny room, half lit by the glow of my laptop, and feel something I'd never felt there: peace. Still, part of me wondered if he'd noticed my note. If he'd laughed the way he always did. That smug, dismissive laugh that made me feel small. Maybe he thought I'd come crawling back. But I wasn't the same woman he'd mocked at that dinner table. I was someone else now. A woman who earned her own bread, even if it was only a crust at a time. Few weeks later, another client messaged me. Then another. Each one paid a little more, expected a little more. And I met every expectation, quietly, steadily, almost fiercely. I was rebuilding from the ruins, one pixel at a time. Sometimes, when I looked at my reflection in the dark window, I didn't see a victim anymore. I saw someone learning how to survive without applause. One evening, as the call to prayer echoed through the street and the last of the daylight faded, I received my first review. Professional. Delivered beyond expectations. It was just one line. But I read it again and again until my eyes blurred. I shut my laptop and let out a shaky breath. The city's noise faded into something softer, almost comforting. I didn't know what my next step would be, only that it would be mine to take. I was earning pennies, but they were mine, and that made all the difference. The first time he called, I almost answered. Not because I missed him, but because I wanted to hear the sound of his panic. Came 3 days after my first big client paid me. My phone lit up with his name, glowing like a ghost from a past life. I just stared at it, watching the screen pulse, hearing the vibration echo through the tiny apartment. Then it stopped. Few minutes later it rang again. And again. By the 5th call, I'd muted the phone and placed it face down on the table. He was finally noticing the silence he'd once laughed at. That evening I opened my laptop instead. Work had become my refuge. Clean lines, colors, shapes that obeyed me. There was no mockery, no noise. Just creation. But even as I designed, I felt the phone's presence, heavy and insistent, like it was breathing behind me. When I finally checked, there were 7 missed calls. And one message. I think you've made your point. Come home. I almost laughed. Come home. As if it was still mine. As if the walls of that mansion hadn't heard my humiliation. Hadn't watched me walk away with nothing but my pride. The next morning, another message appeared. We need to talk. People are starting to ask questions. There it was, the truth. Not concern. Not regret. Reputation. I turned the phone over and went back to my designs. My fingers shook slightly. Not from sadness but from something sharper. Power. He needed me to return before anyone noticed he'd lost control. That week, I didn't answer a single call. Instead, I built my website, wrote my own story in pixels and light. My name, my brand, my work, it was all taking shape. Each notification that wasn't from him felt like a step further away. But he didn't stop. The tone of his messages began to change. The arrogance started to crack. Are you serious about this? You're embarrassing yourself. You're not built for this kind of life. And then, the one that almost made me laugh out loud. You'll regret this, trust me. Well, I'd already regretted him. Kept my replies simple. Silence. My quiet was a weapon he'd never learned to fight. Some nights, when exhaustion hit me, I'd scroll through the old photos still trapped in my gallery. Glimpses of a life that looked perfect. Dinner parties, vacations, his hand on my waist, that fake smile I wore like armor. It all looked so shiny, so empty. The more I looked, the more I realized. I'd been invisible long before I left. My phone buzzed again one night around midnight. I let it ring. Then another message appeared. Please, just tell me where you are. The word please startled me. He'd never used it before. For a moment, I closed my eyes and imagined him pacing in that enormous house, the one filled with everything money could buy. Except someone to listen. I whispered to myself. Now you know how it feels. My business started to bloom quietly. A small client shared my work online, tagging me with kind words. Within days, my inbox flooded with inquiries. I was working 16-hour days, sleeping barely 5, but I felt alive in a way I hadn't in years. Freedom didn't just look good on me, it fit. Then came the call that I didn't expect. Unknown number. I picked up without thinking. Silence. Then his voice, low, careful, like he was trying to sound gentle. Where are you? I didn't speak. I didn't even breathe. I just want to talk, he said softly. We can fix this. You've made your point. Come back. The words come back echoed like a curse. I hung up without a sound. My heart was racing, but not from fear. It was from the sheer thrill of not needing to explain myself anymore. For years he'd spoken over me, through me, around me. Now he was talking to no one. The calls stopped for a few days after that. Then came the emails, long, rambling, desperate. Promises of change, apologies dressed in excuses. Every word dripped with the same arrogance he used to toast with. I deleted them all. Instead, I opened my design files, made my logo sharper, my brand stronger. Each line I drew felt like another wall between us, another boundary he couldn't cross. He'd mocked my silence once. Now it was the only language I spoke. I could almost hear his laughter from that night again, the sound that broke me. But now it didn't hurt, fueled me. The more he begged, the louder I heard his laughter that night. And this time I was the one smiling. I didn't recognize the woman staring back at me. And that was the best feeling I'd had in years. The reflection in the cracked bathroom mirror wasn't the meek, silent wife who once nodded through humiliation. My eyes looked different now. Steadier, colder. The lines on my face weren't from stress anymore. They were from survival. It had been 8 months since I'd left him. 8 months since I'd stopped flinching at every phone vibration, every reminder of what I used to be. Now, the sound that woke me wasn't his voice. It was the soft ping of incoming orders. I'd built something real. My design brand was growing faster than I ever dared imagine. What started as a desperate escape had become an empire in its infancy. One client recommending another, one satisfied customer turning into 10. I turned my pain into a product, my silence into a strategy. Sometimes, while sipping instant coffee at my tiny kitchen table, I'd think about how ironic it was. He had mocked my little hobbies. He had laughed when I told him creativity could pay bills. Now my laptop was my fortune and my freedom. But the mirror was my favorite truth-teller. I leaned closer, tracing my reflection's jawline with my fingertip. You did it, I whispered. The woman who had once asked permission to dream was now unstoppable. That morning an email changed everything. Subject: Feature Opportunity. Women in Business, Urban Rise Magazine. I read it twice. Then a third time. They wanted to interview me. Me, the woman who'd been laughed out of her own marriage. My fingers trembled slightly as I typed my reply. I tried to sound calm, professional, detached. But my heart was racing so fast I could barely breathe. When their editor called, her voice was warm and confident. "We've heard your story," she said. "From homemaker to brand founder. It's inspiring." I smiled at the irony. "It wasn't inspiration," I replied quietly. "It was survival." She laughed gently. "That's even better. Women will relate to that." When the call ended, I sat for a long time in silence. My tiny apartment suddenly felt enormous, echoing with something new: pride. That evening, I stood before the mirror again, practicing answers for the interview. Each word felt like a confession, not to the world but to myself. "What inspired you to start your business?" "Being underestimated." "How did you handle challenges?" "By remembering I'd already survived worse." "What's your message to women who feel stuck?" "Don't wait for anyone to see your worth. Build it yourself." The next morning I took the train downtown for the interview. It was surreal. The city I once drove through as a passenger, now beneath my own control. The magazine office smelled of coffee and ambition. The editor greeted me with a smile, gesturing toward a seat beneath a soft studio light. "Relax," she said. "We just want your story." For a moment I hesitated. Because the truth was, my story began the night I stopped being his wife. The questions flowed easily. My voice didn't tremble. I spoke about courage, fear, rebuilding. I didn't mention his name once. I didn't need to. Halfway through, the photographer adjusted his lens and said, "You have a strong face, like someone who's seen both heaven and hell." I smiled faintly. "I lived there," I replied. When the interview ended, I walked out of that building lighter. The sunlight felt like a reward. Days later, the issue hit stands. I almost didn't buy it. I was afraid to see my own face there. But when I finally opened the glossy pages and found my photo beneath the headline, "From Shadow to CO," my eyes blurred. I remembered every cruel word he'd said that night at the dinner table. Every laugh. Every condescending look. And now, my name was printed in bold, next to the word founder. That night, I poured myself a glass of cheap wine and stood before the mirror again. My reflection smiled back, not timidly, not uncertainly, but with quiet triumph. This was the woman he said would never survive without him. The woman he thought would crawl back. Instead, she'd risen. I traced the headline again with my fingertip and whispered. He used to call me his shadow, but now the world knew my name. It came in a thick white envelope, the kind that used to arrive with embossed lettering and false promises. When I tore it open and read the golden print inside, my hands didn't shake. Not this time. "You are cordially invited to the annual Crestford Corporation Gala Dinner." The same event. The same glittering trap where I'd once sat in silence while my husband mocked me before his rich friends. But this time, I wasn't Mrs. Malik. I was Aisha Qureshi, CEO, founder, sponsor. My company's name was printed neatly on the invitation, beneath the words Platinum Partner. I laughed, not bitterly, but with the kind of disbelief that tastes sweet. I remembered that night vividly. The clinking glasses, the laughter cutting like knives, the humiliation that had burned so deeply it branded my soul. I'd walked out of that dinner broken. Now life was handing me the same room, but this time I'd own a seat at the head table. I placed the invitation on my desk and just stared at it. For a few seconds, I wasn't sure whether to smile or cry. The irony was divine. He had once called me his shadow. And now, his empire was being partly funded by a woman who refused to stay one. I thought of ignoring it at first, walking away quietly, keeping my peace. But something inside me stirred, something that remembered every cruel word, every forced laugh I swallowed that night. Well, I wouldn't stay silent this time. I would show up, not to hurt him, but to remind myself that I'd survived him. I called the event coordinator listed at the bottom of the invitation. "This is Aisha Qureshi," I said calmly. "I'll be attending." Her tone immediately warmed. "We're honored to have you with us, Ms. Qureshi. Your company's success has been quite the buzz lately." I smiled faintly. "Let's just say, it's been a journey." After hanging up, I leaned back in my chair, staring at the city lights flickering through the window. The skyline looked sharper now, more defined, as if the city itself was finally seeing me clearly. The days that followed were a blur of preparation. Not because I needed to impress anyone, but because I wanted to mark this moment, the full circle of my story. I chose a gown the color of moonlight. Elegant, quiet, commanding. The kind of dress that didn't scream for attention but held it anyway. When I tried it on, I looked in the mirror and saw the woman I'd become. Self-made, self-owned, and untouchable. The night before the gala, I couldn't sleep. Not from nerves, but from anticipation. I replayed the first dinner in my head. The laughter, the humiliation. But this time it didn't sting. It was just noise from another lifetime. The next morning, a delivery arrived. A small bouquet of white lilies and signed. I didn't need to guess who sent them. He'd always known lilies were my favorite. The silence between us had stretched for almost a year now. I wondered what he thought when he saw my face in the magazine, the woman he'd underestimated standing where he once stood alone. Did he feel regret? Shame? Envy? I'd stopped trying to guess his emotions long ago. They were a maze I'd already escaped. But tonight would be different. When the sun dipped below the skyline, I stood before the mirror one last time. My reflection was calm, collected, the woman who'd walked away, now walking back on her own terms. I could almost hear my heartbeat syncing with the city's pulse, steady and sure. As I fastened my earrings, I whispered to my reflection, "You owe him nothing. But you owe yourself this moment." Outside, the car engine purred softly. The driver opened the door, and I stepped in, the city lights casting golden streaks across the glass. The roads blurred beneath me, but my destination was clear. The same hotel ballroom, the same crowd, the same golden chandeliers. Except this time, the name on the banner wasn't his alone. It was mine, right beside his, glowing in bold letters under official event sponsors. The driver stopped at the entrance. Cameras flashed. Guests murmured my name. As I stepped out, heels clicking against marble, a slow smile curved on my lips. Every humiliation, every tear, every lonely night, it had all led here. If life was a stage, tonight I'd walk back as the main act. When I walked into that ballroom, the air changed. It wasn't dramatic or loud. It was quiet, sharp, like a collective breath being held. The chandeliers glittered the same way they had that night. Golden, arrogant, and unbothered by the misery they once reflected. The same tables. The same laughter. The same stage. Only I was different. My heels clicked against marble as I entered, each step echoing louder than any words I could have spoken. Heads turned slowly, one by one, like a row of dominoes falling in stunned recognition. For a second, I could almost hear their whispers ripple through the crowd. "Is that her? She looks incredible. She came." I smiled, small, deliberate. Silence was still my favorite language. Across the room I saw him. He froze mid-laugh, a glass halfway to his lips. The same hand that once held mine now gripped his drink a little tighter. His eyes widened, not with guilt but with disbelief. I wasn't supposed to rise. I wasn't supposed to be seen again. But there I was, standing in the very place he had broken me, draped not in shame but in quiet victory. His circle of friends, the same ones who had laughed at his jokes that night, now shifted uncomfortably in their seats. One of them nodded politely at me. Another looked away. Funny how success rearranges people's loyalty. I didn't rush toward him. I didn't speak. I just walked past him with calm grace and found my place, at the sponsor's table. My nameplate glimmered beneath the soft light. Aisha Qureshi, founder AQ Designs. He saw it. I made sure he did. The dinner began, and for the first time in years, I was surrounded by genuine respect. The host welcomed guests, praising the sponsors for their support and contributions. When they mentioned AQ Designs, applause filled the hall. He clapped too. I watched his hands tremble as he did. The same man who once laughed at me for dreaming too small was now applauding my success publicly, because he had to. The irony tasted sweeter than champagne. When the servers poured wine, I caught his reflection in the glass. He was watching me, his jaw tight, his pride unraveling one silent second at a time. I didn't avoid his gaze. I met it, steady, emotionless. His eyes flickered like he was searching for the version of me he remembered, the quiet wife who smiled on cue, who shrank so he could shine. But she was gone. Instead, he saw a woman who had built an empire from her scars. The speeches began. Executives stood to talk about progress, innovation, future goals. I barely heard the words. I was too busy savoring the silence between us. Then the host smiled and gestured toward me. We're proud to announce that this year's design collaboration, the one that redefined our brand's look, was created by AQ Designs. Let's take a moment to appreciate the woman behind the transformation. Cameras flashed. Applause thundered. My name rolled through that room like a quiet storm. He looked like someone had just stolen the floor beneath him. And in a way I had. I stood gracefully, nodding a simple thank you. No speech. No grand gestures. Just dignity and silence. That silence said everything his laughter once tried to erase. Afterward, as the music softened and people mingled, he finally approached. He stopped beside my table, pretending to smile. "You look different," he said softly. I tilted my head slightly. "No," I replied. "I just stopped looking at myself through your eyes." His smile faltered. "You've done well," he muttered, glancing at my nameplate again. "I suppose congratulations are in order." I raised my glass, not to him but to the woman I'd become. "I suppose they are." He nodded awkwardly and took a deep drink, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for someone to distract him. But all the attention that once belonged to him now drifted toward me. I didn't need revenge. His silence was proof enough. Throughout the evening, I barely said a word. And yet, every compliment, every respectful nod, every camera flash spoke louder than any insult he had ever thrown my way. The same crowd that once laughed at me now wanted to shake my hand. They asked for my card. They spoke about partnerships, investments, collaborations. Their smiles weren't pity, they were admiration. Across the hall, he sat with another drink, his posture sinking lower with every toast raised in my name. I didn't stay until the end. Before dessert, I rose quietly, excused myself and walked toward the exit. As I passed him, I saw the tremor in his hand, the same hand that once pointed at me when I was the joke. He poured another drink, but this time it wasn't celebration in his glass. It was his pride he swallowed. I used to think karma took its time. But it doesn't. Sometimes it just waits for the right silence to echo through. Weeks after that dinner, whispers began to travel. Quiet, uncertain at first, like the hum before a storm. His name was no longer spoken with respect. It was coated with hesitation, pity, even mockery. I didn't go looking for the news. Came to me. A friend from the business circle messaged me one morning. "Did you hear? His company's in trouble. Major losses. Investors pulling out." I read the text twice, not out of disbelief, but out of an eerie calm. The same man who once flaunted his empire now stood on sinking ground. I didn't reply immediately. I just set my phone down, took a sip of tea, and let the warmth spread through me. It wasn't joy I felt. It was peace, cold, steady peace. They said his expansion had been reckless. Lavish deals. Overspending. Pride parading as strategy. He wanted the world to see his success, even if it meant building castles on air. And now the air had turned thin. Everywhere I went, I heard fragments of his downfall wrapped in gossip and concern. He's hiding losses. His partners want out. Someone leaked documents. People said it softly, like his name had become fragile glass, dangerous to hold. I met him once after that. Not by design but by accident. It was at a charity gala. He stood by the bar, surrounded by faces that once orbited him like planets. Now they merely hovered, distant, polite, waiting for the next opportunity to drift away. When he saw me, he straightened his shoulders, fixed his cufflinks, the same nervous habit I used to notice when he lied. "Aisha," he greeted, voice calm, smile sharp. "Good to see you again." "Good to see you too," I said, matching his smile, soft, measured, unreadable. But behind that smile I saw the cracks. His eyes darted too often. His laughter came too quickly. He looked like a man trying to convince himself that everything was fine. People around us whispered, and though I pretended not to listen, I heard every word. "They say he's selling shares quietly. His new project flopped. Can you believe it? After all that noise." He must have heard it too. The sound of his own reputation crumbling in real time. But pride wouldn't let him flinch. "So," he said, clearing his throat, "your company's doing well. Congratulations." "Thank you," I replied simply. He nodded, eyes flickering toward the cameras nearby. I realized he wasn't talking to me. He was performing, still playing the role of a man in control. Behind his smile I saw fear. Not of failure but of being seen failing. It was the same fear that once drove him to humiliate others, to prove his worth by breaking someone else's spirit. He couldn't bear invisibility. As the evening wore on, people gravitated toward me, shaking hands, exchanging cards, congratulating me on my recent feature in business today. I noticed his jaw tighten each time someone said my name. At one point he stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You must be enjoying this," he said quietly, the smile gone now. I looked at him, really looked at him. The man who once stood taller than everyone in the room now seemed smaller. His confidence like glass cracking beneath his own footsteps. "No," I said softly. "I just learned not to confuse silence with defeat." He blinked, unsure how to respond. So he did what he always did, he smiled. That same smile he used to hide behind when the world wasn't watching. But this time it didn't hide anything. It only revealed how hollow he'd become. Later that night as I drove home, city lights flickering across my windshield, I thought about how everything had come full circle. He used to measure strength in wealth and applause. I measured mine in peace and self-respect. He had both once, the spotlight and the crowd. Now he had neither. The man who once laughed at my silence was now drowning in his own. And for the first time I didn't feel anger. Just distance. The kind that separates a storm from the calm that follows it. The world no longer spoke of him with envy. Spoke with pity. And when our paths crossed again, when our eyes met across yet another crowded room, I offered him the same smile he once gave me. Polite, controlled, me. Because I finally understood the truth he never could. Pride doesn't protect you when the lights go out. It only keeps you blind to the fall. Ending sting. The man who laughed at me was now begging the world not to laugh at him. Sometimes life doesn't give you closure. It gives you an opportunity to write it yourself. Started with an email. Formal. Polite. Almost desperate in tone. "Dear Ms. Malik, we would like to explore a potential partnership between our company and yours. We believe collaboration could be mutually beneficial." No name signed at the bottom, just a title. Head of Strategic Operations, Ramon Holdings. My breath caught. Ramon Holdings. His empire. I read the message twice, then leaned back in my chair. The irony was almost poetic. The same company whose CEO once mocked my simplicity now needed my brand to survive. My assistant Sarah walked in just then with a file in hand. "New proposal from a firm downtown. Seems urgent." I nodded, forcing my expression to stay neutral. "Schedule a meeting for next week. I'll handle this one personally." She smiled. "You sure? They sound a little desperate." "Desperation," I said quietly, "has a strange way of humbling people." For the next few days I prepared, not just with documents and data, but with calm. I didn't want revenge to guide me. I wanted control to define me. The morning of the meeting, I chose a simple black suit. Clean lines. No jewelry. My power wasn't in how I looked. It was in how much I didn't have to prove anymore. The office they'd rented for the negotiation was all glass and steel, just like I remembered his taste. Cold elegance pretending to be class. When I entered the conference room, 3 executives stood to greet me. Their faces were unfamiliar, but one chair at the end of the table was empty. The chair meant for him. "We're honored you came, Ms. Malik," one of them began nervously. "Mr. Rahman will be joining us shortly. He's running late." "Of course," I replied, settling into my seat. My voice was calm, almost pleasant. "Let's begin." We spent the next half hour discussing figures, projections, and product strategies. I spoke firmly but softly, the tone of someone who didn't need to impress. Finally, the door opened. A scent I hadn't realized I remembered until that second. He walked in, same crisp suit, same proud posture, but the light behind his eyes was dimmer now. He froze for just a moment when he saw me, then quickly masked it with a tight smile. "Aisha," he said, trying to sound casual. "Didn't expect to see you here." "I could say the same," I replied. His team looked confused, glancing between us. "You two know each other?" one asked hesitantly. He forced a chuckle. "We were married. Once." The air shifted. Even the hum of the air conditioning seemed to pause. I didn't flinch. "And now we're here to discuss business," I said evenly. "Let's keep it that way." He nodded, but his hands trembled slightly as he opened the presentation folder. He noticed that I noticed. Throughout the meeting, he tried to dominate the discussion, interrupting, correcting, smiling too much. But every time he spoke, his voice carried that thin layer of insecurity, like a man trying to reclaim ground that no longer existed beneath his feet. When his legal head slid the final document across the table for signatures, I felt my heart slow. This was the moment. He didn't know my company was mine. He thought I was just the face, the consultant, not the founder, not the name behind every success headline he'd quietly envied. He picked up his pen first, signing with a flourish, pretending not to shake. Then he slid the folder toward me. "Your turn," he said, that old condescension sneaking through. I took the pen, signed my name. Aisha Malik, CEO and founder. When I slid the folder back, his eyes fell on the title. His breath caught. For the first time, his face lost all color. He looked up slowly, disbelief spreading like a stain. "You," he whispered. I met his gaze, calm, unshaken. "Yes," I said softly. "Me." The silence that followed was sharper than any insult he had ever thrown at me. He looked around the room, searching for composure, for rescue, for dignity, but found none. I stood closing my folder. "I believe our partnership will be beneficial for both of us." And then I walked toward the door, heels clicking like punctuation to every unspoken word between us. Behind me I heard the faintest sound, not of footsteps but of pride breaking, ending sting. When he looked up and saw my name on the contract, he went pale. His voice trembled when he finally said it. "I'm sorry." 2 words. 2 words I once begged to hear. But now, standing across from him in that glass office, those words felt small, almost weightless. He looked older. The lines on his face were deeper. His eyes duller. The arrogance that once carried him through every room had burned out, leaving only the ashes of a man who finally understood loss. "I didn't think you'd make it," he admitted quietly. "Not without me." I smiled, not out of spite but because I had once believed the same lie. "You were right," I said. "I didn't make it without you. I made it after you." He blinked, confused. "What does that mean?" "It means your cruelty was my beginning." I stepped closer, my tone calm but sharp enough to cut through the silence. "Every laugh you shared at my expense, every word that made me feel small, I built something out of it. You mocked me for being simple. Turns out simplicity has focus. It doesn't need noise to grow." He lowered his gaze, exhaling slowly. "I was stupid. Proud. Then he looked up, voice trembling. I thought humiliating you made me powerful. I didn't reply immediately. I watched him, the man who once stood taller than my dreams now shrinking beneath his own guilt. Behind him, the skyline stretched endlessly, sunlight catching on glass towers. The world outside looked different now, or maybe it was me who had changed. Do you hate me? He asked. That question hung between us, heavier than any apology could ever be. I thought about the nights I cried myself to sleep in that cold apartment, about the cheap coffee I drank while designing through exhaustion, about the letters I never sent. And then I shook my head. No, I said softly. I don't hate you. His eyes lifted in surprise. You don't? No, I repeated. Because hate still ties me to you. And I cut that rope a long time ago. He swallowed hard, looking away. I ruined the best thing I ever had. For the first time I believed him. Not because he said it with sincerity, but because I could see it in his posture, in the way his pride had finally collapsed. I didn't come back for revenge, I told him. I came back to see what I'd once thought I needed. And now I know I don't. He looked up again, eyes searching mine like a drowning man reaching for air. Then why agree to this partnership? Because business isn't personal, I said. That was your mistake. You thought belittling me was strategy. I learned to make profit out of peace. A silence followed. Deep, uncomfortable, necessary. He sighed, shoulders slumping. You're stronger than I ever gave you credit for. I always was, I whispered. You just never looked closely enough. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The hum of the city outside filled the space where our love used to live. Then, almost as if the universe was giving me closure, I felt something shift inside me, that final thread of bitterness snapping loose. I extended my hand. Good luck with the merger. He hesitated, then took it. His grip uncertain, mine steady. And in that touch I felt it all. The years of humiliation, the long nights of rebuilding, the quiet triumph that didn't need applause. This was never about proving him wrong. It was about proving me right. He whispered, almost to himself. You really don't need me anymore, do you? I smiled gently. I never did. I just forgot that for a while. As I turned to leave, his reflection lingered in the glass. Small, blurred, fading. My reflection, on the other hand, stood sharp and certain. Freedom wasn't revenge. It was release. Ending sting. For the first time I thanked him for breaking me enough to rebuild. Success doesn't always roar. Sometimes it hums quietly. In peace, in purpose, in the sound of your own laughter returning home. Months passed, and my life began to move with its own rhythm. No chaos, no noise. Just growth. My company wasn't just thriving. It was expanding faster than I'd ever imagined. What began in a one-room apartment now filled 3 floors of an office overlooking the same skyline that once seemed unreachable. Every morning, I walked into that building with the same calm determination that had carried me out of my old life. The walls weren't lined with luxury or vanity. They were filled with stories. Women who came from broken marriages, women who thought they had nothing left, now found careers, dignity, and hope within these walls. I had turned my pain into purpose, my revenge into redemption. At first I didn't plan for it. But one afternoon, while signing another contract, I looked at the growing profits and thought, this money means nothing if it doesn't build someone else up. So I started a fund, the Rebuild Project. It offered grants, mentorship, and housing support to women starting over after divorce or abuse. It wasn't charity. It was continuation of the same fire that once saved me. My accountant once asked, half-jokingly, Aisha, aren't you giving away too much? Smiled. You can't lose what was never meant to be hoarded. I'm not building a bank. I'm building freedom. And strangely, the more I gave, the more my fortune grew. Investors reached out. Interviews poured in. Magazines called me. The woman who turned betrayal into an empire. But none of it defined me. I didn't crave attention anymore. Only peace. Then, one quiet Sunday morning, as I sipped coffee on my balcony, something caught my eye in the newspaper. Familiar name. Ramon Holdings declares bankruptcy amid scandal. There it was, his face tucked between numbers and words that spoke of debts, lawsuits, and failed ventures. He looked older, tired. The same confident jawline now shadowed with regret. I stared for a long moment. Not with glee. Not even pity. Just stillness. For a second, memories flooded back. That dinner, the laughter, the sting of humiliation. And then they passed, like smoke dissolving in sunlight. He had mocked me for dreaming small. Now he lived inside the cage of his own pride. My assistant Sarah walked in holding her tablet. "Bad news for Ramon Holdings," she said, unaware of the history buried under those words. I folded the paper calmly. "Yes," I said. "It happens when you build towers on ego instead of empathy." She smiled faintly. "You sound like you knew them." I looked out over the city, wind brushing against my face. "Once," I replied. "A lifetime ago." That afternoon, I visited one of our new project centers. A small workshop filled with women learning digital design. One of them, a young mother, showed me her first client poster. "It's not perfect," she said nervously. I smiled at her, seeing a reflection of who I once was. "Neither was I," I said softly. "But look where imperfection can take you." As she laughed shyly, something in me settled. The peace I had chased for years finally found a place to rest. When I returned home that evening, the sky had turned orange with sunset. I poured a glass of water, stood by the window, and thought, this is the life I was meant to build. Not in response to anyone. Not to prove a point. But to exist. Fully, freely, fearlessly. I picked up the newspaper one last time before tossing it away. And as I did, I whispered under my breath, not out of bitterness but gratitude. "Thank you." Because without him, I might never have met the version of myself who stood here today. Whole, steady, unshakable. I didn't win by earning more. I won by needing less. Ending sting final. He mocked my marriage, but I made a life he could only dream of.